and welcome to our event here at UN Women. As you can see, we are addressing, ah, thank you. Thank you. Now I can start properly. And I can start by acknowledging Excellency here to my left, the ambassador, the deputy permanent representative of Colombia, Ambassador Juan Jose Quintana. We are also expecting the permanent representative of Malawi in due course. And so let me welcome him and all of you, partners, colleagues, activists on the ground, academics, and those who have come to learn, as well as those who have brought their expertise. Let me welcome you to this side event and to UN Women. My name is Mary Elena John, and I am the Senior Racial Justice Lead at UN Women, where I have worked for close to 10 years or so, perhaps a little bit more. So this is home for me, and I'm welcoming you to our home. This is a space that I'm welcoming you to where we are giving the space, there's a lot of space talking about right now, space in our office, not only to the voices of this global community, but we are creating space for communities discriminated against by work, on work and dissent, to move actively into the global advocacy and action channels through which their goals can gain stronger traction. So our top line goal for today is to support the advancement of their longer term ambition, which is to seek a UN resolution to gain greater protection under international law and mechanisms. But one of the intermediate goals is for UN Women to support this goal by publishing a policy brief that informs, educates, and helps bring greater attention to their situation at the global level to enable this ambition. And then the immediate and ground level goal of today is for those of you who are here to learn, of course, to give you that information, and for those of you who are already engaged, to get your input into this policy brief. And that is really important for us today. We'll speak more about that later. Welcome once more. I'm going to now hand over to our able moderator, Bina Palikal, who is the chair of the Dalit Human Rights Foundation. Yes, you know what happened is that I wrote it and spell check took over. So thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Elena. And I really like. Am I audible? Yeah, maybe that's better. Thank you so much, Maria Elena. And I really like that this is our space and we are creating a space for women to come together. And that is a vision that we see agencies like UN Women, that it's a space that we would like to. And I would really like to acknowledge Maria Elena and her team for providing this space for us to come together, because it's an issue that we will talk about in the course of time, which is something that many people do not welcome, and that's why we are here at the table. Before I go to, I would like to introduce the panelists and the guests today with us. On my left, of course, we have His Excellency Ambassador Juan Jose Contina is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Colombia to the United Nations in New York. Mr. Quintana has been serving from 2013 at the Embassy of Colombia to the Netherlands in charge of matters concerning the International Court of Justice. He was a minister in charge of legal affairs at the Permanent Mission of Colombia to the United Nations in New York, as well as a delegate to the Security Council from 2011 to 2012. In 2010, he served as an advisor, Secretariat for Legal Affairs, Organization of the American States. We welcome you very much to this panel discussion. We also will be joined by Her Excellency Dr. Agnes Mary Chimbiri Molande, who is the permanent representative of the Republic of Malawi to the United Nations in New York. She was appointed the permanent representative in June 2021 by His Excellency the President of the Republic of Malawi, Dr. Lazarus Makati Chakwera. Agnes Chimbiri Molandi has about 15 years of experience in the United Nations. Most recently, she served for over 6 years as portfolio manager for governance for the United Nations Development Program in Malawi from 2015 to 2021. And we have joining us online Mr. Rory Mungovan of Australia, who is currently the chief of the Asia Pacific section with the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights in Geneva. And from 2016 to 2019, Mr. Mungovan served as a country representative for ILO in Myanmar, one of the largest field offices. He has also very consistently supported the issues of the communities discriminated on work and dissent and caste specifically. We also are joined by Miss Laura Nierin Kindi is the chair of the UN Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls, which she joined in November 2023. She's a senior managing consultant of Pro Initiatives Agency, a human rights firm based in Uganda, and has assumed leadership positions in civil society organizations in Africa, Europe, and America. Joining with me two panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Maria Elena. I know she introduced herself, but a little bit more about her. She is the senior racial justice lead at UN Women. Her work on an intersectional racial justice approach is focused on women of African descent in the context of the Decade for People of African Descent, placing special attention on intersectionality in the reparatory justice arena. In addition, she has developed a stream of work on creative arts as an underutilized strategy in anti racism efforts. And other global areas of concentration include communities discriminated on work and dissent. She's also an author with a historical fiction novel called Unburnable, and we're really happy that she's here because she has really supported our cause. Joining her as another panelist on this first session is Simona Torotskoy, who's Dr. Simona Torotskoy, a Roma activist from Romania, a research fellow for the Global Forum of Communities Discriminated on Work and Dissent, representing the European Roma Grassroots Organization Network. She has a PhD in public policy from the Central European University and have worked for UNICEF. Simona has a particular interest in education policies for Roma minorities, and along with her team, has actually put this event and many other events together during the CSW. We would like to also welcome with us, who has just joined us, Her Excellency Dr. Agnes Mary Chimberi Molande from Malawi. Well, we welcome you. So, to kick off, I know that there has been a lot of interest regarding this event and many events across the Commission of Status of Women. We are here, women from communities discriminated on work and dissent, who belong to the Dalit community, like I am, Roma, like Simona is, Haratin. We also have Osu, Oru. We also represent Burakumin from Japan. We have various different identities coming together under the umbrella of the Global Forum of Communities Discriminated on Work and Dissent. And along with the support of UN Women, have drafted a policy on the women and highlighting the issues of women and challenges, and how do we take these challenges forward in terms of how do we address these challenges and what are the strategies. This policy brief was co-written, authored by the women from the community, UN Women, and other stalwarts who've been in the human rights field for a long time. So we're here to present some of those findings and highlight what are the challenges of women. I mean, there have been many papers and policy briefs written on Roma women, on Dalit women, Haratin, but to bring them together under this larger umbrella as a strategy to move forward with similarly discriminated groups, in this case, similarly discriminated women from the communities discriminated on work and dissent, to also look at what are those intersecting policies and practices to align with the Beijing Declaration. We do know that the Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action was a phenomenal and a path breaking framework for women's rights globally. But how do we fit in? Where are we at that table? And I was just telling the other day that we are at the table, but are we at the decision making roles? Do women from the marginalized communities have a stake in these conversations? I will now move on to, oh, I just missed Kilambola from Brazil as well. We are here. Sorry. Thank you. And Palenque as well from Latin America. So I can go on talking like this because this is an issue that's very close to my heart. But a very famous human rights activist in, I think it was Shirley Chisholm, who said that if you don't get a seat at the table, bring your folding chairs. We are here with our folding chairs at the table, at the decision making platforms, because that's where we want to go, and we want to take this forward as women from discriminated communities. So now I would like to request the permanent, just His Excellency Ambassador Juan Jose Quintanas, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative, to give your keynote address. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon and good evening, everybody. I'm very glad to be here. The government of Colombia appreciates the efforts invested in organizing this event. These discussions are crucial at such a pivotal moment in our collective pursuit of justice, equality, and human rights. As we mark the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration, a platform of action, we must reaffirm our commitment to ensuring that no woman, young woman, adolescent, or girl is left behind, especially those facing multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, such as women from communities discriminated on work and descent, CDWD. According to the UN Women Policy Brief that will be presented today, over 270 million of persons worldwide belong to communities facing discrimination based on work and descent. These figures are staggering. Within these communities, women and girls experience different forms of discrimination, limiting their access to education, economic opportunities, healthcare, and justice. The intersectionality of gender, caste, race, and economic status exacerbates their vulnerability, making them disproportionately exposed to gender based violence, forced labor, early marriage, and lack of political representation. Despite existing international human rights frameworks, these women remain at the margins of policymaking. Too often, their specific concerns are either subsumed within broader gender equality agendas or sidelined in racial justice movements. Addressing these requires dedicated legislative and policy interventions that recognize their unique struggles and aspirations. The policy brief Maria Elena mentioned and underscores that discrimination against CDWD women is deeply entrenched in social norms and economic structures. To dismantle these barriers, we must implement temporary special measures designed to accelerate their full participation in decision making. Colombia is firmly committed to addressing such structural inequalities through a recently adopted Feminist Foreign Policy, FFP. Our FFP seeks to transform foreign relations by placing gender equality and intersectionality at the core of decision making. Through this approach, we emphasize the rights of the most vulnerable women, including indigenous, Afro-descendant, and displaced women, whose struggles mirror those of CDWD women globally. As we look ahead, we want to invite you all to commit to take some concrete steps, namely, centering the voices of CDWD women in policymaking, ensuring their full and meaningful participation, adopting intersectional and transformative approaches that go beyond rhetoric and create real challenge, strengthening global cooperation to dismantle systemic discrimination inspired by the principles of justice, dignity, and human rights for all. Colombia stands ready to work alongside UN Women, civil society, and international partners in order to create a world where women from all backgrounds can live free from discrimination and violence. As our president keeps remarking, gender justice is not just a lofty goal, it is a true prerequisite for true global equality. I thank you all.
His Excellency Ambassador Juan Jose Quintana, that was fantastic. I think we really look on Colombia to journey with us for women's rights and specifically looking at women from CDWD. Thank you very much and very inspiring to hear you speak. Thank you. I'd now like to invite Maria Elena to give the context and the background of the brief that you all have been working on. Over to you.
Thank you, Vina. Thank you, Your Excellency. That was very strong. And we will definitely be recording, when I say recording, replicating what you have said as we take our struggle. We collaborate with our constituencies to take their struggle forward. So all protocols observed, Excellencies and comrades. Let me say that this gathering is really an essential part of moving things forward, because this is where we are going to continue ensuring that we have diverse perspectives reflected in the final version of the brief. So your contributions today will also inform final reviews of the brief by the special rapporteurs on minorities and the special rapporteur on racism, who will review and also contribute before our planned launch of the final report at the HLPF, High Level Political Forum, in July. I want to begin by applauding the tremendous effort of what I am starting to call quite a bit the grassroots multilateralism that has brought us to this point. This is a term that I feel is recognizing how far-flung communities from Asia to Africa to Latin America have come together to influence a global discourse, not local. The local discourses and the regional discourses are ongoing, but a global discourse on dissent-based discrimination. This consultative model is championed by the network of Communities Discriminated on Work and Dissent organization, which is called the Global Forum of People from these communities. And also, it is championed by the lead author of this report, who is herself a former special rapporteur on minorities, Ms. Rita Isiak Ndiaye. And we're so sorry she was not able to join us in person or online today. She has just taken up a new position, a diplomatic position that would prevent her from being here. So this is demonstrating the power of marginalized groups to unite around common experiences and to compel action from key institutions, even when mainstream multilateral avenues seem out of reach, as they tend to appear more than ever at this moment. It is an inspiring testament to what happens when community-led organizations from around the world collaborate on policy and advocacy. So now, turning to the substance of our policy brief, let me highlight some of the international frameworks that underpin this call to action from the communities. They're not starting from zero, but there's still far to go. We start with CERD, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, ICERD. This is the principal legally binding instrument that protects communities that face dissent-based discrimination. Its Article 1 explicitly includes dissent within the scope of racial discrimination, and the CERD committee clarified through its general recommendation number 29 that discrimination based on work or inherited status, such as caste or similar system, nullifies or impairs equal enjoyment of human rights. Notably, the committee calls on states to recognize the multiple discrimination that women in these communities face and to provide disaggregated data that captures their compounded vulnerabilities. And others will speak about data again later. There's also CEDAW, as I think most people in this room will know, which underscores the sex and gender-based discrimination are inextricably linked with other factors such as race, caste, inherited status. Their general recommendation 25 emphasizes that certain groups of women, like CDWD women, require special legislative, policy, and budgetary measures, including quotas, special temporary measures, to level the playing field. The draft policy brief that we will discuss reiterates this point and notes that exclusion of CDWD women remains largely invisible in national laws, many national laws, social policies, and frameworks. There are a number of UN principles and guidelines that also address this form of discrimination, especially drawing on the UN Subcommission on the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights working paper, which defines this form of discrimination as any preference or exclusion tied to inherited status, often justified by deeply entrenched notions of purity and pollution. And this part is a very important aspect of this type of caste-based discrimination. Such stigma is especially harmful for women who then suffer disproportionate levels of sexual and gender-based violence and are at higher risk for everything from forced labor and trafficking to every imaginable other abuse. The brief reminds us that descent-based discrimination is not gender neutral, and it calls for UN-wide engagement and enforcement to address it. There are other areas, other international acknowledgements over time that are beginning to raise their hands and their voices. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights has very recently adopted a resolution protecting the rights of these communities. And we see a growing body of regional and international case law, studies, and advocacy reinforcing this. I also want to make special mention of the UN Network on Racial Discrimination and Protection of Minorities, which is actually where I first heard of this community only about 3 years ago. And I am supposedly a racial justice specialist. That is to tell you, it does have a ways to go to get into the mainstream, and we are determined to do it. This network has already issued a guidance tool on descent-based discrimination back in 2017, and that also explicitly acknowledges the gendered implications of such discrimination, especially that gender-based violence is frequently met with complete impunity. So these frameworks, together with the voices of communities, have built a strong case that the international community not only recognizes, but is also obligated to address their issues. Yet, even although we have that acknowledgement that's growing, women's experiences within that group often remains sidelines. For example, they often overlook some very specific forms of violence and economic marginalization that CDWD women face, while general women's rights advocacy really highlights this descent-based stigma. And it is precisely that gap that our policy brief seeks to bridge, because as we all know, guidance and piecemeal solutions do not suffice. The next step is operationalizing these standards across UN agencies, member states, and civil society so that policies actually transform women's lives. I have a few more things, but I believe I want to end here so that my colleague can continue with her part of the report.
Thank you, Maria Elena. Welcome, everyone. So what I would like to focus on in my presentation, which is very much aligned with the aim of the policy brief, is just to show, or at least to provide a wider context of the applicable, of the specific challenges and violations of the rights of CDWD women. So we have, I mean, the consultant we have asked to work on this brief has identified about 13 main areas of concerns and issues targeting CWD women, including poverty, as Maria Elena mentioned, stigmatization, the notion of purity and pollution, access to justice, the feminization of poverty, access to education and public services in general. So what I will do in the next couple of minutes is that I will take you through all these areas, and I will just emphasize a bit what are the challenges. So this list of issues or main concerns has been mainly identified based on the existing OSCHR database on recommendations and observations to member states regarding the human rights violations against CDWD women as expressed or addressed through UN mechanisms. So for example, when it comes to Roma women, there are nearly 500 recommendations and observations from 160 documents among 13 mechanisms targeting Roma women only. So that's, I think it's significant in itself. This brief doesn't cover all these recommendations, but we have tried to look also at other women from the other CWD groups, and try to systematize a bit what are the key challenges. So let me take you to the first one. So as Maria Elena said, one of the key challenges that CW women face, or the specific form of discrimination based on work and descent, it's very much related to the notion of stigma, purity, and pollution. What does this mean? Maria Elena has already touched upon that, but I think it's very important to emphasize that this stigmatization, it's usually based on the identity of the CW women, but also the work that they carry. Because as I will show a bit later, most of the times we have been pushed or forced into specific types of jobs that were seen unclean, unpure, and therefore the majority of the population saw these communities inferior, and therefore led to social exclusion and human rights violations. So stigmatization, notions of purity and pollution are significant in this case, and I think this is one of the key challenges to understand what is this about. Yeah, so for example, Dalit women work as manual scavengers or sweepers and suffer from extreme forms of social exclusion even within their own caste. Yeah, so I think this is also something that the brief addresses, looking specifically what's happening also within the community. Forced labor, again, going back to the point on discrimination based on work, and labor restrictions are significantly affecting women from CWD communities. Many times, as I said, we are forced to work in segregated, socially stigmatized service sectors. These have been many times traditionally assigned to CWD women, but many times they have been forced to do this type of work. So for example, the Haratin community in Africa, they are victims of slavery, descendants of slaves, and they are pushed into specific types of work. Women being most of the times at risk of being regularly beaten, intimidated, and separated from their families, subject to sexual assault and different forms of violations. The next area of concern is the lack of identity documents, and this is also related a bit to the lack of data about CDWD communities. So many times communities are underdocumented, undocumented, and they face severe difficulties in civil registration procedures and in obtaining documents to kind of access basic services, including healthcare services, education, employment, and all the rest. So the lack of identity documents has been seen as one of the key areas of concern. And we know that most of the rights are enjoyed based on the issue of having an identity document. Poverty, it's another area of concern. Many times, the CDWD communities are perceived as living in a vicious circle of poverty. The violence they experience, the stereotypes, both the gender stereotypes, but also the stigmatizations that the CWD communities come with often leads to the feminization of poverty, and we have also documented as GFOD this in a report. Again, in many African countries, the caste system itself is a multiplier that can compound the existence of both poverty and discrimination, many times one being the cause to the other. In terms of education, there's often a limited access to education, especially quality education, dropout from school. Many women remain illiterate or have low levels of education compared to the majority communities. In many countries and communities, we see that school segregation is still happening, and this is a persistent issue across regions. And I think we see that there are so many similarities between the communities when it comes to education and the type of quality of education our communities receive. And then there is also another theme which is quite sensitive, I would say. And this is related to the existence of several harmful practices, including forced early child marriages, but also accusations of witchcraft, offering girls for domestic work to families of landlords, or girls being offered to deities for fulfilling religious obligations. And maybe, I'm not sure whether Quinn will speak about this, but I think the quite strong system that we have and we always hear about is the Trotsky system, which, women and girls are enslaved as a form of atonement to the gods. So the examples are not region specific. We can find this also in other regions, but I just wanted to illustrate some cases. In many of the Latin American countries, especially targeting the Quilombola communities, we see that land rights and climate issues are severely affecting the women from our communities. Many times women lack titles on their lands, and they face forced removals from the lands that they have traditionally occupied. And many times these lands are used for exploitation, for infrastructure projects. So these communities are pushed towards the margins, and it's the same happening with Roma in Europe. Many times placed at the waste dumps, being severely affected. Their health being severely affected by all sorts of toxics and pollutants. Another topic addressed in the brief is the violence against women and trafficking, and this is mainly because of the multiple intersectional forms of discrimination they face. Poverty, discrimination, low levels of education. So all together coming in have contributed to a high number of reported cases of abduction, sexual harassment, rape, and even intimidation of women from CDWD communities. And also what I also see as a form of violence is the lack of access to public services and resources. So this violence manifests in different forms. As I said, I'm just trying to be brief in the presentation. Healthcare and well-being, it's also related to a certain extent to the financial resources that CWD women have, but also there are cultural and physical barriers to gain access to all sorts of health services, maternal health, but also in relation to the topic that I mentioned before, this also affects the registration of childbirths. So the exclusion from the bureaucratic system in terms of obtaining a legal status. So here I just want to refer to the example of Roma women who are often, even nowadays in Europe, are segregated in maternity wards. They are abused physically, verbally by medical staff. Even I think recently, a few months ago, there was a case in one of the Central Eastern European countries. This was happening. So it's a constant kind of threat to the well-being of CDWD women. Again, as the Deputy Ambassador has mentioned, there's a serious challenge when it comes to lack of participation in decision-making processes and policy-making processes. The women from CDWD communities are not part of the systems, or if they are, I think there are other singular examples. But of course, we have, to a certain extent, the contribution of civil society in trying to step in and compensate for this. And the last point is access to justice. I think we saw across different communities that one of the most research issue is access to justice for CWD communities. And I want to applaud the OACHR initiative on I'll wrap up in a minute, to document access to justice for the Dalit community in Asia. So accessing justice services, it's also a barrier because many times we see that the discrimination is coming from the system, justice system itself, which actually was supposed to support CWD women. So with this, I want to wrap up, and maybe I can give the floor to Maria Elena to tell more about the conclusions, the findings, and recommendations.
Thank you, Simona. And I want to be super quick here because I think by going a bit in depth on those kinds of findings, like what the meat and potatoes of this is, we kind of have a good sense. So I'm just going to read you a quick top line set of recommendations and then we can expand on it as we go forward. So the key findings, I think they're well covered. So recommendations, strengthen legal protections. Governments must review, enforce legislation prohibiting such discrimination, ensuring it explicitly protects women and girls, and where relevant, adopt special temporary measures. 2, improve data collection. Data is going to be very, very important. You cannot count what you cannot see, something like that. There's an expression that says you have to have it. Establish a systemic disaggregated data gathering that captures the specific experience of CDWD women, followed by rigorous data protection principles. 3, meaningful participation. 4, dedicated action plans. Where feasible, design targeted national action plans or integrate CDWD concerns into existing gender equality strategies, complete with baselines and measurable targets. This part is very important. And 5, enhance the engagement of the United Nations. It says that UN agencies and mechanisms must prioritize the rights of women from the community across all portfolios, ensuring consistent inclusion in treaties, universal periodic reviews, and other human rights processes. And with that, I will end, I believe, our segment, and we will depart the panel and invite the next set of panelists to the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much, His Excellency the Ambassador, Maria Elena, and Simona. Yes.
Woman, such as policies, procedure, all the issues that we have brought up today. I'd like to know what are our solution? What is UN Women? If we can come up with, hey, this is the problem and these are the solutions and this is what we have done. being an Afghan woman and just coming from Afghanistan not long ago, and I still go back and forth there, there are issues that I understand, just like all of us are here. Afghan women, they are not allowed to have education. So what is UN Women and UN agencies finding solution and making sure that solution is actually put to action? Because everything that we have mentioned today, these are all problems. I completely understand. I'm here as a woman for women of the world globally. We understand problems. What are the solutions and what are we doing?
Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
intervention. And why I spoke so quickly is that we have a section at after the panels, and we are going to invite discussion around that. This is not a space for UN women to say, I know the solution here. I want to do this. I want to do all of it as a person, as an organization within a larger system. We are turning to you in the room to give us such recommendations that those of us who have the power within the organization to do so will. So I hope you stay till that section comes. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will have a session at the end for answering the questions. So thanks a lot. I'd like to call on the next panel. And we have with us, let me just get my notes. We have with us Priyanka Sami. If you can come and join us on the panel. We have Elena. If you can come and join us, and Queen Biseng. So Priyanka is a Dalit feminist activist based in India. She's a member of the National Federation of Dalit Women, a grassroots network of Dalit women, community-based organizations, and the Global Gender and Intersectionality Lead at the International Budget Partnership. Priyanka is part of several social justice movements and networks from the local to the global. She is the co-chair of the International Budget Partnership's Feminist Advisory Group and also a member of the UN Women's Steering Committee for the Beijing Plus 30 process in India. We have Maria Elena, who is the, we have next is Queen Biseng. Queen is the working as an Africa coordinator for the Global Forum of Communities Discriminated and Work in Dissent. And she has a very long, many years of work on human rights, and now specifically working on the rights of women from the Communities Discriminated and Work in Dissent. I've just got my notes mixed up. I'll come back to introduction of Elena, but I'd request Priyanka if you can start, Queen, and then we go to Elena. Yeah.
Thank you, Beena, for that introduction. A very good evening to all of you here. And I really want to, at the outset, congratulate UN Women and GFORD, the Global Forum for Communities Discriminated on Work in Dissent, for coming up with this extraordinary policy brief. I say extraordinary because I think this is one step towards visibilizing the invisible. The women from the CDWD communities have been entirely invisible in the policy discourse. And I think bringing out a policy brief on issues and concerns of women from CDWD communities itself is path-breaking. So big round of applause to GFORD and UN Women for this pioneering initiative. I think the feminist movement is at a very critical juncture, 30 years post-Beijing, and it's a moment to celebrate, but I don't know whether we women from the CDWD communities have reason to celebrate, but we're here nonetheless, and we're definitely here to stay. just to talk specifically about the policy brief, like I said, it's a significant step. A lot of nuances have been unpacked, by the authors. It's really great. But while we recognize the strength of the policy brief, we must also address some gaps and envision transformative paths forward. I said, this has been said in the first session, but I would like to reiterate the fact that the absence of robust disaggregated data significantly undermines the potential of our interventions, especially policy interventions. So without detailed intersectional data, CDWD women remain invisible. Our struggles are generalized, our struggles are homogenized. We're definitely, women across the world are definitely not a homogenized group, a homogeneous group. And, that's been such a massive problem. And therefore, without intersectional disaggregated data, our advocacy efforts are also very diluted. So to truly address the roots of exclusion, I think we must collectively invest in community-led data collection, ensuring that policy interventions are grounded in our lived realities, particularly looking at a CDWD women with disabilities, CDWD sexual minorities, CDWD single women, elderly women. There's so much nuance which is lost without that intersectional data. And I think I would really like to acknowledge that the brief acknowledges intersectionality for sure, but it doesn't fully sort of interrogate how patriarchy within the CDWD communities sort of perpetuates exclusion of women, right? So if you look at, patriarchy within CDWD communities, what are the gender roles? What are the patriarchal norms that continue to silence CDWD women's voices? I think our strategies must include community dialogues on how we're going to challenge patriarchal norms simultaneously. So while we're fighting for CDW women's rights outside, also we need to do some intra-community reflections. And I think that women should really be at the forefront of these conversations from the grassroots to the global level. And the other point is, in addressing violence against CDWD women, it's absolutely critical that our advocacy interrogates preventive measures along with justice responses. There's very little that we do on preventive measures. So while improving access to justice is absolutely critical, we must also build community-based preventive frameworks, that is educating youth, educating men and our allies to dismantle the acceptance of violence. Violence is so normalized in our communities, especially violence against Dalit women, violence against Roma women, violence against Quilambala women. So how are we going to lead these community-led preventive interventions? And I like the fact that, the policy brief discusses climate justice issues. It really sort of spotlights climate issues, but we also need to deepen our understanding and strengthen that piece on climate, because CDWD, women's leadership in environmental governance, should really be nurtured and recognized formally. So as we strategize forward, I propose 2-3 actionable commitments. One, of course, prioritize intersectional data collection. That's a non-negotiable. And the other is establishing robust task forces of CDWD women. It would be great if there's a CDWD global network of women. I think maybe launching a powerful advocacy campaign just led by CDWD women would be brilliant. And also, I think as a part of that network, we really need to cultivate intersectional alliances and coalitions. And of course, all power to transnational solidarities. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka. I will not go into summarizing because we are running out of time. But I'd like to introduce my next speaker, Elena Sirbu, who is the president of the Roma Women Platform, Romni, from Moldova. As a human rights defender and president of the Roma Women Platform, Romni, in Moldova, Elena has focused on improving the situation of Roma girls and women, an issue that has increasingly garnered attention both nationally and globally. Discrimination, segregation, and low education levels are some of the issues faced by Roma women. The marginalized position of Roma women and girls in Moldova stems from a combination of gender discrimination, racism, social class exclusion, and Elena works with women from the community. Over to you, Elena.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me to welcome the initiative organizing this important side event. My name is Elena Sârbu. I am head of Roma Women Platform Romni, and I am member of European Roma grassroots organization. High level of poverty, racial profiling, discrimination, inequality in access services highlights the important vulnerabilities intersecting to fuel poverty and exclusion from the society. These are the primary and common challenges for 2,070 million people around the world who belong to communities that are facing discrimination based on work and descent. This aspect is also reflected in this policy brief, which states that only one policy aims to provide the broader context of the applicable international normative framework. I am Roma woman. I know how Roma women are caught in the vicious circle of poverty, violence, unemployment, and limited access to public services, barriers that come from outside and inside community. The focus area where Roma are especially vulnerable and government and intergovernmental institution efforts are needed are protecting Roma women and children's rights, education, health, employment, social protection and housing, participation in public life, fighting discrimination, fighting against human trafficking, culture, and mass media. These challenges disproportionately affect Roma communities who face intersecting forms of discrimination based on ethnicity, gender, and socioeconomic status. This intersectionality exacerbates their vulnerability to all types of violence, exploitation, and social exclusion. Issues such as child marriage, forced marriage, genital mutilation, adolescent pregnancy, illiteracy, and limited economic opportunities further perpetuate cycle of poverty and marginalization with the Roma women and other CDWD communities. Improving the situation of Roma women communities require a comprehensive multi-sectoral approach grounded in human rights, social justice, the active participation of Roma themselves, sustainability, and synergy between various international organizations, local government, and Roma civil society. As a human rights defender, as a Roma woman feminist, I recommend to be included in this policy brief first, to explicitly include the fact that CDWD Roma community are also found in other countries from East Europe, with large Roma communities not mentioned in this document. Romania, Moldova, Ukraine, the Balkans, and other countries. It's like to revise a map of these countries. To include Roma and other CDWD communities, grassroots, NGOs led by women in long-term program with flexible financial support. I believe the brief did not address this perspective yet. Also, to create a global Roma and other CDWD Women Network initiative under UN Women, which will allow for the possible addressing of unique challenges faced by Roma and other CDWD women and girls. And one question maybe, the brief sorry. The brief highlighted the importance of respecting, protecting, promoting implementation, and monitoring the human rights of individual facing such discrimination, including through the collection of disaggregate data. In line with data protection and privacy principle, the only comment I had is more of a maybe question or maybe even a long discussion. Where do we stand on the disaggregation of data by both gender and descent, race, ethnicity? By we, I'm referring both to civil society platform advocated in this document and do where European countries currently stand. My understanding was that privacy laws sometimes prevent the collection of descent-based data, at least with regard to ethnicity and race. Many thanks for your time. And I hope this policy brief bring a light of hope and equality and prosperity for women and men, part of CDWD community around the world. Good luck.
Thank you, Elena. Over to Queen Besing, who is the United Nations Program Specialist for Africa at the Global Forum of Communities Discriminated on Work and Dissent. Queen, you have 3 minutes. And because we're running short of time, we need to
Yeah,
really
thank you,
keep-
Bina. I don't think I will come back to what the colleagues already mentioned. And Simona also took time to talk about the violations in Priyanka and Elena also brought up some gaps. Just to mention that unlike the Dalit in Asia, Roma in Europe, Pralenke and Kilambola in Latin America, the CDWD women in Africa are also denied basic rights, including access to formal education, healthcare, economic opportunities, which falls amongst the 12 critical areas of concern outlined by the Beijing Plus framework. Their exclusion from social and political structures leave them vulnerable to exploitation, including gender-based violence and economic oppression. The lack of their voices in both political and social matters proves that their needs and concerns are often neglected in the formulation of these policies. The policy brief is very significant to the African CDWD communities in that it highlights intersectionality by shedding the light on the discrimination faced by these women in Africa, where gender-based violence and discrimination intersect with systemic exclusion due to their descent and ancestral work. That this intersection of factors creates unique challenges that need tailored solutions. It also addresses legal and social inequalities. It promotes socioeconomic empowerment for these women. It encourages the fight against stigma and discrimination and promotes representation and participation, but advocating for the active participation of Africa CDWD women in decision-making process at local, national, and international level. It also highlights the importance of giving these women a platform to voice their concerns and take part in policies and programs that affect their life. We also had to mention about what can we upload in this policy brief, apart from the significance and also the gap. We want to upload the fact that it focuses on highlighting the marginalized women and often overlooked groups of women by centering the experiences of CDWD women. It brings attention to an urgent issue that is often sidelined in broader gender equality discussion. The specific focus on this group amplifies their voices and demands action to address their unique challenges. It highlights a comprehensive understanding of intersectionality. It focuses on the legal framework and social protection, advocacy for economic empowerment, global solidarity and accountability, and commitment to awareness and advocacy by raising awareness and advocating for societal changes. We know public awareness is a key to challenging harmful stereotypes, reducing stigma, and ultimately achieving long-term social change. I have just some few recommendations added to what my colleagues already share. The need for a legal framework. I will not go into the details, but I want to mention here that the African Commission on Human and People's Rights has adopted a resolution, as Maria Elena already mentioned, for the promotion and the protection of these rights, the rights of these communities discriminated on work and descent in Africa, especially the women. There is still a lot to be done. We are still trying to advocate and getting to have measures to have this resolution being internalized. It is not a binding legal framework, but we know it is a tool that these communities can start relying on to actually demand for the respect of their rights and have their rights being promoted. And also important to have inclusive education, healthcare access, economic empowerment, and more combating gender-based violence, which take a strong action to prevent this violence done to these women of the community. And this includes support services for the survivors. Like most of these women often face gender-based violence, also legal assistance and counseling. I'll stop here because most of the things I wanted to mention were already mentioned by my colleagues. Thank you. I just had to pick from everyone.
Thank you very much to Elena, Priyanka, and Queen. I think well brought in some of the gaps as well as what is working with the brief. So thanks a lot. We have to move to the next session. So I'd request the others to join me on here. I'd like to request Her Excellency Dr. Agnes Marie Chimberi Molande to join me here, who I had already introduced, but she was not there when I introduced her, is the permanent representative of the Republic of Malawi to the United Nations in New York. She was appointed the permanent representative in June 2021 by His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Malawi, Dr. Lazarus McCarthy Chakwera. Madam has about 15 years of experience in the UN. Most recently, she served for over 6 years as portfolio manager for governance for the UNDP in Malawi from 2015 to 2021. Welcome. We would like to also welcome Laura Nirengindi is the chair of the UN Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls. And we'd also like to welcome you. And of course, joining online is Mr. Mongovan, who is with the OHCHR. So I'd request Her Excellencies to please give your remarks.
Thank you very much for inviting me to join you. And we thank the Global Forum for really designating time and energy to really organize this. And I would like to thank and congratulate UN Women for hosting this because it's very, very important. And in absentia, the ambassador, the deputy ambassador of Colombia, for expressing the political commitment of a member state. It's very important that there is that political commitment. Thank you. So it's really important that voices of these communities are heard and really, and even to bring about the data issues, the issues that are affecting this. So I felt that I've heard a lot of issues that have been raised, but I think we need to hear more from the discussants. Otherwise, I can make closing remarks at the very end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we'll come back to you
Yes.
at the end. I'd like to request Laura Nerinkini, please give your remarks.
Thank you. Excellencies, colleagues, and friends. First of all, I want to congratulate you on this expertly crafted policy brief. Today, we come together to acknowledge our progress while affirming our commitment to the work that lies ahead. And judging by the stories that I've heard so far, there is a lot of work ahead of us. The Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls has consistently recognized that women are not monolithic. Rather, they are shaped by the interplay of race, class, sexual orientation, disability, and other aspects of identity. This intersectional approach acknowledges that discrimination and other human rights violations interact dynamically. In our reports and country visits, we have recommended the collection of data that is sufficiently disaggregated to understand the intersectionality of gender with other grounds of discrimination, and I had some of the former speakers speaking to this. We have also asked that attention is paid to combating stereotypes based on intersectional identities, and that mechanisms for addressing human rights violations are established and adopt an intersectional report. Now, from the list of countries that was mentioned in the brief requiring attention for DWD communities, the working group has visited 3 of them, Mauritania, Spain, and Romania. To summarize some of the key issues in the reports, we emphasize that women and girls who are victims or survivors of slavery, as well as those with disabilities, refugee women, and women deprived of liberty face marginalization in all aspects of life. They experience higher rates of poverty, limited access to quality education, reduced rates of birth and identity registration, and increased vulnerability to child and forced marriage, along with gender-based violence, including female genital mutilation. And a lot of these issues have been reemphasized. Similarly, during our visit to Romania, we documented discrimination against Roma women. We recommended implementing targeted, intersectional, and gender-sensitive measures to create more opportunities for women to access formal employment, especially in rural areas, and to integrate women from marginalized communities such as Roma women and migrant and refugee women. Now, in the policy brief, you rightly emphasize that access to justice is a fundamental concern. Women from CDWD communities often encounter numerous barriers when accessing justice, including legal illiteracy, a lack of awareness about their rights, limited access to legal aid, and various structural challenges that were again mentioned. So additionally, laws concerning work and dissent frequently disadvantage women and girls. Women from these communities face discrimination based on work and dissent, and they deserve legal protections. The working group has consistently advocated for strong anti-discrimination laws, laws that prohibit discrimination based on caste, ethnicity, or dissent in employment, education, and public services. These laws should be enforced and strengthened. This includes establishing clear legal mechanisms for redress and accountability, and it is essential to provide girls from marginalized communities with access to legal education and aid. Similarly, it is crucial for women and girls to actively participate in developing and implementing laws and policies that concern their lives in all aspects, and encouraging women's political involvement in these communities through temporary special measures, leadership training, and support networks is essential to ensure that their voices are heard in decision-making processes. We are continually inspired when we meet feminist leaders from various minority and marginalized groups, and I was very honored to listen to you today. And in closing, the brief addresses negative stereotypes as well as the concepts of purity and pollution. Increasing social awareness, therefore, and advocacy campaigns will be essential for combating stigma and stereotypes. And each of us has an active role in promoting community dialogue. And I really loved hearing that word. My background is community-based grassroots activism. So the successful practice mentioned in the policy brief from Colombia, where women narrate their stories, should be encouraged further. We need more such narratives from diverse women. By addressing these areas, along with those mentioned in the brief, through targeted and inclusive policies, governments and organizations such as ours can help dismantle systemic barriers and promote equality for women and girls in those communities facing discrimination based on their work and dissent. the UN Working Group on Discrimination and Girls stands ready to support these efforts. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Nearing Kindi. I think you brought in some really clear points of intervention. We would now like to go to Mr. Rory Mungovan. If we
Hi, good evening from Geneva. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to join online, and really full marks to UN Women for organizing this, for creating the space, as Maria Elena said, and really to commend the Global Forum and the groups in this network for what I think has been a model of grassroots. I mean, I love this term of grassroots multilateralism. I think it's exactly what has done. They have firstly globalized this agenda by bringing together such a diverse range of communities from every region affected by this form of discrimination. But they've also mainstreamed the agenda into so many different places, before so many different mechanisms, treaty bodies, special rapporteurs we've heard from within the UPR process, within many different human rights processes, and have really successfully, I think, brought it to a new stage. I would just like to share a few reflections because so much has been said, and I think many of the key points really have come out in our discussion, but perhaps just a couple of reflections that might bring a few of the threads together. I think everything that the Global Forum has done, and we have discussed here today, demonstrates both the intersectionality of the issues, but also this intersectionality gap. Having successfully brought the issue into many different frameworks, we still suffer from this gap or disconnect between different normative frameworks, different institutional approaches, different programmatic approaches. And the goal really is how to sort of close that intersectionality gap in our norms and in our practice. And when I think about what I've heard tonight and looking at the paper, and I think even the headlines of the recommendations in the paper, that intersectionality gap is expressed in four ways. Firstly, there's this normative gap and this thrust of the paper towards strengthening legal frameworks. Now, when it comes to the normative gap, I think one of the questions that we have always struggled with is to what degree is the solution lie in specialized norms and specialized laws, specialized frameworks, and to what degree does the solution lie in incorporating this aspect of discrimination, work and dissent into broader discrimination laws? And I think this is what Chairperson was speaking to then, how to you can have a specialized law that addresses caste and untouchability, but it may not yet bring the gender dimension that's required for the experience of women living with this discrimination. So how do we bring these issues into the sort of broader and comprehensive approach to discrimination laws? And I think one of the interesting developments we've seen is, particularly as this issue has manifested itself through diaspora communities, we've seen, many states, I mean, including my own Australia, in Canada, the UK, and some US states as well, begin to incorporate, for instance, caste discrimination into broader anti-discrimination laws. The second gap I can see is the institutional gap. when we look at our setup for, human rights protection, human rights redress, whether it's the judicial system, whether it's the institutional framework, national human rights commissions, for instance, national women's commissions, national commissions on children's rights, and in some cases, some specialized commissions to address this. We have National Dalit Commission in Nepal, for instance. And yet institutions can be at best blind to this form of discrimination, or at worst carrying the same mindset and bias, often by virtue of their diversity, their representation of groups within staff or within leadership. And so how do we address this institutional gap? Is it to strengthen dedicated institutions to work on this issue? Or is it to create a greater synergy and focus among different types of national institution to give attention to work and dissent issues? So I think this institutional piece is also very important. And then the third gap, which I think, the paper speaks to very much, is I don't know what to call it, the UN gap, the mainstreaming gap. I mean, the intersectionality of this means it relates to almost every mandate that the UN has, and every agency, every program has a relevance to combating discrimination on work and dissent. And I really commend UN Women for kind of taking this and internalizing this, at least with respect to their mandate. But of course, we have ILO, we have UN Habitat, we have UNICEF, we have the whole UN family that could create much greater synergies around this issue. I think we came a long way with the UN guidance note. This, for those of you, who are participating, I mean, we have a UN network on discrimination against minorities. It produced a guidance note that is intended to sort of raise the visibility, awareness, and programmatic action of UN agencies on this issue. We need to take that to the next stage. I mean, just as this UN Women's paper will also serve that purpose, but how do we take it to the next stage in terms of the programmatic application of this guidance, and in fact even greater synergy and joint action among UN agencies, UN actors around this agenda. So I think it's a really great to see the agenda continuing to evolve. I think each of these steps taken is deepening our understanding and deepening the toolbox that we have to work on this issue. And I just would like to again pay tribute to the groups themselves, who've driven this. And I think part of our job at the UN side is to provide them with the platform, provide them with the space that allows this agenda to be developed from the grassroots. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rory Mungovan, I think, who has been a very big supporter within the OHCHR system to Dalit rights and to CDWD rights. It's really inspiring to see the journey that we have made, but also with the support of Mr. Mungovan and many others like him within the system, like Marie Elena from the UN Women, who are supporting us. And I don't think we'd be able to collectivize our efforts globally if it weren't for the support of these agencies. So thanks so much, Rory. That was really great. Now I'd like to open the floor and go for some questions, and then we can go for the closing remarks from Her Excellency. Yes, please. Somebody has a mic, or yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. This is Sumitra Manandar from work in Nepal for more than 2 decades with international development, and currently the director of Friends of Adwan Nepal. This is really a great platform to learn all these experience and information with these three panelists, like a slot. And I totally agree, like what Priyanka and colleagues have mentioned, and Rory actually, because as a witness, we work with a lot of local organizations, Dalit organizations, marginalized. And so I conducted more than 30 projects working with these issues. So whenever we see this kind of equity kind of thing happening, and people coming and sharing their experience in a great platform, again, we see some kind of, oh yes, if this can have happened, this might have happened, something like that. So within this every year's platform, we see things happening, but sometimes we are seeing the same faces for years, if there is like rotational capacity building kind of opportunities for people, and people here would also hear updated experience. So this is not that it is not happening, but people might share more opportunities, gain the equity point of view to see the world and share their experiences. That's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just Marilena?
Yes, I just wanted to make a quick note of the time. We are due to finish at 6, but because we are the last meeting for the day, we can continue for a while, but I believe we may soon lose our IT colleagues where the translation is coming through, as well as the people on Zoom. So I just want us to be aware of that as we continue. But let us look to 15 minutes. Gerald, you may need to just shut down, but we can continue. I'm recording here so that we can continue to have the input recorded for future.
We need to be mindful of the
Excellency's
time.
yes.
So
Yes.
Okay. We are okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so can we agree on a time that is suitable, Excellency in particular, by when would we want to? By 1:15. So we have 15 minutes. And if I also may ask you to think about why we are here in terms of your contribution. We will have other spaces where we can go into why is the UN like it is. I do a lot of that because we know that the UN as a system is grounded in the same racist structure, global structure that created it. So we're not going to solve that here. What we want to solve right now is the policy brief and to get your inputs into it. So can we bear that in mind as we make our contributions? Thank you. We have 15 minutes, including Her Excellency's remarks. So let's go.
Okay, I will keep mine short. Then, hi everyone, my name is Arpin. I'm from a small town in Malawi called Mzuzu. I'm a mental health advocate, and the only question I had was you talked about social justice and you talked about how these women are not included in decision-making spaces. So my only question is, when I approach people from government, when I approach decision makers, how do I ensure that they bring these women and girls in, not just as tokenistic representation, but that they have the power to make those decisions? And how do I ensure that these girls are able to get an education so they can sit where you are sitting someday in the future? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Vishnu Pariyar. I'm the founding president of EDWAN. EDWAN stands for Association Dalit Women's Advancement of Nepal. I want to add what she said. I think to see the change, we have to start from ourselves. I have to open my mouth today because I have been trying to include in this group also for many years. I'm from Dalit, right? From Dalit community. So many side events, so many parallel events happen. I always ask, is there any opportunity to speak? I never get, that one time I had to include the UN person, then I was able to speak. So we have to make change here ourselves first, include everyone, because we need the voice from different community, different country. Today, It should have been one person from Nepal. There was nothing. So that is one thing. Another thing, what I want to say is, we talk about always policy, 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 and a language, and making the beautiful language in the policy level. Are we seeing what is happening in grassroots level? What is happening, I want to say, this is my suggestion also, in the grassroots level. You know, those organizations who are making the change in the grassroots level, working, those people who doesn't even know what is Beijing platform, those people who doesn't even know about the CSW, we are working on this field. We are making the change on this field. Those people don't even know and who get the funding, who get the chance to come here. People who have the access of power, who have access of the connection. Those people get funding. From Nepal, I can tell you 4 people come every year here from the family and speak.
Can we?
So that's why it would have to change. Otherwise, you know, one of the previous speakers said that we need to make the coalition. Yes, it has to be inclusive coalition. Thank you.
Dina, can I just quickly respond and say
go ahead.
thank you very much for that intervention? And I also see how it constitutes a very specific recommendation that if it is not strongly reflected in the policy brief, we can look at it again and see how we can make sure that that is reflected in terms of who gets access and the people from the grassroots who are the ones doing the work really and moving the needle and connecting to the academic activists, but we have to look at bringing those who may not speak English or may not speak French or Spanish, but speak a language and invest in the translators and so on to make it happen. So we have recorded your recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, you did.
Okay. Okay, good evening to everyone. My name is Gordana Herold. I'm coming from Germany. I'm a part from the German delegation, and I'm a Roma woman. I'm very proud to be a Roma woman, and I thanks a lot for the organizers to bring up on the international level the create space for the Roma woman arguments. Roma people living just 700 years here in Europe, and finally, you create space for the Roma, Romnia arguments. Finally. Thank you.
Is there a recommend? So that is a acknowledgement of the effort. Is there a recommendation? Continue making spaces, perhaps, is the recommendation. Okay. Yes.
Now we have quasi nothing on space now.
Yes.
And my apple is that you create much more now space to make much more visible our argument now.
Yes.
And don't let. Motto is don't be left no woman, and we are a part of all this movement, and we want to be a part of this movement and to sit together with all other women on the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very effective side event. I would say it's the main event in mainstreaming or centering the concerns, specifically talking about the policy brief. Number one, I think the gaps that specifically Marilena and Rory have brought, I feel it'll be good to include some of that. We may not be able to solve, but at least address what are the institutional gaps, what are the the other, what you have also very clearly said in terms of grassroots multilateralism. I think while the multilateralism on one hand is trying to be wrecked and weakened, at the same time, how can we ensure that the grassroots multilateralism, through specifically communities discriminated on work and descent, then the intersectionality of gender, disability, and several others. How can we bring that and strengthen this? I think that aspect, if it can be mentioned and then addressed in some way, I know we cannot address everything, but these are things, even if you have a policy, what are the ways in which we are able to have traction? I think some of these would be very, very helpful. Thank you very much.
Any more questions? Yes, please, here. I think that would be the last question because we'd like some responses as well.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Chika Idoko, and it's great to see all the work that has been done. My first question is around how the policy brief can build in safeguards that allows us to constantly engage with emerging communities that now move into this space. Because it's not static, and there are communities that have been historically discriminated against, and they're evolving ones due to all of the things that we've mentioned, such as the intersections, and they move into that vulnerable space. So how do we build in safeguards to ensure that that's not left outside? The second point is around employers of labor. There are some people from these communities that have made it into the workplace, but still face discrimination, but they are the minorities. So how do we get employers of labor as to be part of this conversation so that we don't just look at discrimination based on race and all of the recognized equality areas, that we go deeper? Thank you. Sorry.
So, Marilena, would you like to quickly respond to some of that, or?
I think I've been responding as we went along, but in this last one, I would like to say that that could, it sounds like something very concrete in terms of the evolving and emerging. And, I was myself looking at some of the communities that have not yet found their way to see a CDWD format, such as, well, in Nigeria, I've heard long about the Osu community. In India and Pakistan, the centuries-old descendants of Africans who were among the most marginalized. I don't know if they still are, but to me, that would be firmly in the CDWD group, but they would have to get to the point where they self-identify and so on. So I think it's very, very important for this point of the evolving nature that this is a new movement, a new, very nascent, in fact. And how do we build it and how do we magnify? Thank you.
Simona, would you quickly like to respond since you're okay? Just before I hand it to Her Excellency, I'd also like to echo just respond to this, that while she was speaking, I felt that while the policy brief is focusing on CDWD, it would be great if that can also cater to other discriminated groups that we might not be able to name, because of our reach, and because, so how can we make the brief more broad and catering to other marginalities as well, that we may not necessarily be able to name, but this document look like Mr. Mongovan did refer to the guidance tool within the UN system, which is specifically on discrimination based on work and descent, but can also be used for other marginalities. So how do we broaden that a bit, maybe in terms of the language, etc.? Yeah. Having said that, yes, please,
Yes,
Laura.
I really like the gentleman's question from Malawi on education. I had referred earlier to the use of temporary special measures. The strategies like affirmative action for historically disadvantaged groups is one argument that has been used to put girls in school, and women and girls from other communities, whether it's disability or refugees. So this is something that you could advocate for using, of course, the human rights frameworks, and if your constitution has progressive provisions that you can rely on, I think it's an issue that, you know, could be easily taken up without much struggle against the idea if you use human rights language. Thank you.
I'll start with the gentleman from Malawi, my own country. Welcome to New York. And you ask a very important question. And just to inform everybody that the UN created the UN Youth Office, and therefore, and Malawi and Ireland are co-facilitating commemoration of the Global Program of Action for the Youth around UNGAT 80. So we've been given space for the youth to bring the youth to speak out and be part of the high-level event. And we are still working on that in terms of modalities for that high-level event. That's one way, that youth office, that's one way of bringing the girls and the boys to be part of key decision-making. Just to say that I think key solution is let's have a group of friends for this type of work. And because that provides a space for member states that are interested when they hear, and they'll be able to bring in the political commitments, policy issues, and you can also bring in the issues of the gaps that we talked about here, the data, the institutional gaps and all that. And, you know, 2015, the UN decided that by 2030, nobody, no community, no country should be left behind. So we need to work together towards eliminating this type of discrimination. And we need to tools that will bring this type of discrimination into the broader mechanisms for addressing discrimination, as Rory has mentioned earlier on. Institutional gap mentioned by Rory can also be addressed through partnerships. So we need more partnerships of groups that are working around the discrimination area, and therefore you share more information and more knowledge and strategies. The UN country teams in countries should also partner with the CSOs to integrate the issue of discrimination of these communities into the UN joint programs. That will address some of the issues. And I think mainly let's really mobilize funds to make sure that more women from these communities come and speak out and tell us and make their voices heard. Thank you very much.
Excellency, thank you so much for the final word, and it has come in the nick of time as I have been given the signal that says we are now at the very, very end of it. Thank you so much to you, Ambassador, Excellency, and to all of you who created the time to come here and to contribute. I think we have a lot to work with. Thank you so much.
And thank you to UN Women and Marilena really for bringing us all together here. I think it wouldn't have been possible without your real big support to this issue and to bring us all to the table. So thanks a lot, and thank you for this space.
Thank you.